Hello my friends, and a very warm welcome back to my painting channel. And in this video I'm going to be painting part 4 of my Resident Evil 2 board game set, and we're going to paint Robert Kendo. So this is the gun store owner from the Resident Evil 2 video game. We're going to paint him a little bit different, so instead of using the same skin tones as normal, we're just going to go and mix things up a little bit. So I'm going to use the Citadel skin tones just for a little bit of a change. It's always nice to mix things up and show you guys a couple of different ways in which you can paint skin and give you a few different options in sort of like the paints that you can use and things like that. We're going to have a very similar sort of effect by the end of it. We're just going to use a few different colours rather than the bellow sets that I've been using quite often. So we're starting here with a Cadian flesh tone, and again, as I say, this is a Games Workshop paint, and as you can see I'm applying this nice and thinly so that this will go onto the miniature in multiple layers, so 2 or 3 coats depending on how thin you thin your paint. So from there we're going to move on to another really large part of the miniature, and with this we're using bone white, and we're going to paint all of the shirt. Now from what I can gather is there's 2 different ways in which you could paint this character. You could go for a plaid shirt in yellow to be a little bit more of an up-to-date and more modern version of the character and a modern take on the character based on the Resident Evil 2 remake. Or if you wanted to keep it nice and natural, nice and retro, you could paint it a lot more like the original character, and that's what I'm going to do in this. So I'm spending a lot of time researching and looking into the original character because it's a little bit more sort of along the lines of my childhood when I used to play the video game years and years ago. So I wanted to kind of rekindle that little bit of nostalgia for myself. So as I say, we're going to paint this using bone white. So we're going to paint this in a nice sort of creamy white shirt rather than worrying too much about painting up the plaid and going too advanced for the new version. So once that's dry, then we're also just going to paint the trousers. So we're painting these jeans. The colour scheme for this guy is very simple, so we're going to keep it nice and simple, and I'm sticking with a dark Prussian blue for the jeans here. As you can see, I'm not being overly careful until I just get to that point where the 2 colours sort of collide so that we can kind of stop them from going into each other before we apply the wash. And then just placing a nice healthy dose of this dark Prussian blue across the trousers, just making sure that I've got a nice even coat, and as I say, just being careful not to mix those colours together into the shirt. You know, these are all base coats, so you don't have to be overly precious on it, but it does benefit you, and it is always useful to just be a little bit careful because it makes your job a little bit easier later on. So we're moving on to one of my favourite colours, which is the dark rust. This is another Vallejo from the Panzer Aces. With this one, I'm just going to paint the shoes. I'm going to paint the small amount of his hair, and I'm also going to paint the leather straps that he's got holding his trousers up. So we're going to paint these. I'm going to try, again, as I say, don't have to be overly perfect because you can tidy it up later, but we're going to be as careful as we can, just so that it leaves us with less work to do later on, so that we can really focus on bringing those colours together rather than repairing any mistakes or any damages or anything that we've kind of gotten wrong. So as I said, I'm painting this version up to be a little bit more retro, because the box set that I painted, if you followed any of the other videos, I do also have videos on Claire, Leon and Ada, and I also have one on the zombie dogs as well, and there will be more to come. But I'm painting these sets to keep them a little bit more retro, just so that I get the nostalgia from playing the old video games when I play the board game myself as well. So I'm moving on to another colour that I use a lot of, and this is a tenebrous grey from AK Interactive. Again, as I always say, you can use black, that will work out just as well, but I like this paint. It moves quite nicely on my brush, it covers quite nicely onto the miniature, and it has a really nice matte effect when it dries as well. So I'm just painting his shotgun using that colour, and then we're just going to pick out a few small details with the shotgun with this flat earth as well. So as you can see, we need to paint a little bit of the pump here, just around the hand, being careful again, like I say, not to get this onto other colours, and just down on the handle as well where he's holding onto the shotgun, and this will separate those colours nicely. It'll give us a little bit more to look at, so that the model isn't too flat and it's not all just one colour and things like that. Adds a little bit more character and texture to the miniature. Now once all of our base coats are done, we're just going to move on to Agrax Earthshade. As always, I mix a small amount of water with this, just so that it moves onto the miniature a little better and it doesn't pool too much so that it doesn't dry down too dark. And I'm just going to cover the whole miniature in this. Now you don't have to do this, you can use a skin wash instead and things like that. But I'm using the single tone across the whole model just to try to tie things together. And of course just to try to make things as easy as possible to follow. So it makes it easy for me to paint, but it's also easy for you guys then to paint along with me should you want to. Sometimes going that little bit too overboard and that little bit too extreme can sometimes leave it a little bit difficult to follow, so I'm trying to be as nice and simple as possible. So we're going back to the skin now. We're going to start to build these skin colours back up. We're going back to that Cadian flesh tone, and again with these nice thin colours we're going to start to be able to build these colours up and build that vibrancy. And as you can see, I'm using my fine detail brush and I'm just being careful just to build the muscle tone on the arms and to just build the light across those little points of muscle on his forearm. Leaving some of the gaps or leaving some brush strokes just so that it creates that element of muscle tone and definition as well, and that will add a little bit more character to the model later as well. So again, trying to keep things as simple as possible, I'm going to mix two colours together. We're going Cadian flesh tone and Kislev flesh, and to be as easy as possible I'm mixing them purposefully exactly 50-50, so half of each, half of one and half of the other, and this will make the highlight, that single step, just lighter. And again with a nice thin paint we're now going to start to be a little bit more specific about where we paint in, so across the cheekbones, across the nose, the forehead, across the muscle tone and texture on the forearms, and just on the hands and fingers and things like that as well. Again, if you've seen me painting skin quite a lot, it's just about picking out where the light would be and trying to build that colour and build that tone up, as you can see here. So we'll paint a little bit more of the forearm here just to give you an idea. So you see how we leave in some of the areas where the wash is sat, and we're just building that light highlight just across, as you can see. And there you go, just across the cheekbones as well, and around the ears and things like that. So then the natural progression then is to just use Kislev flesh on its own. So we've got Cadian flesh tone, then the wash, then back to the Cadian flesh tone, then half Cadian flesh tone, half Kislev flesh. So the natural then is to just use Kislev flesh on its own. We're going to use that nice and thin again so that as this dries down it's going to blend into the model quite nicely, and it's going to give a really nice even skin tone as it dries. And again, as you can see, I'm just being very careful about where I'm painting. Cheekbones, nose, the hand holding on to the shotgun, and of course things like the muscle tone and texture on the forearm as well. And this is something that the more you practice, the better you get at just building these colours and building these tones. Again, like I say, I'm trying to be as simple as possible, make things nice and easy to follow, make things nice and fun to paint as well, but without going too in depth. As you can see, I'm using the very tip of my brush to kind of create little creases and folds just across the forehead there, just to give it a little bit more depth to the model, to make it look like he's got a little bit of a frown going on. Sometimes leaving the colours underneath in those sorts of areas is really great in terms of building that character, because you can get a lot more out of the faces by doing so. And again, just showing you on the other arm here as well. So as you can see, this is the nice simplistic perfect sort of highlight colour then, and as you can see I'm being very selective on this arm and just around the thumb and things like that about where I want this tone to be. And again, as I say, the more you practice this, the better you get. And there's loads of different paint companies out there that do great skin ranges. I tend to use Vallejo a lot, but as I'm showing you here, you can use Games Workshop in equally the same sort of way. So we're going to move on now, and we're going to really build up this white shirt, and we're going to make this pop. It's not so much white, we're using creamy colours. So we're using this bone white, which is quite a creamy white. And as you can see, again, I've thinned the paints down quite nicely, and I'm trying to run my brush sort of diagonally across his sort of middle area and across the chest and things like that, just to kind of capture the dynamic pose of the miniature, to kind of capture the way that the folds of the shirt are just moving across rather than being straight down and things like that. So I tend to follow along the pose of the miniature when I'm painting, and try to keep these brush strokes nice and thin and quite uniformed and quite patterned. And as you can see, you're starting to boost that colour and that vibrancy already in the middle. And we're just going to do the same thing all of the way around. I'm not going to show you all of the way around, but just to give you an idea as to how I'm sort of painting this up, as you can see. So it is just a case of following around the miniature, trying to leave the shaded areas and the darker areas, trying to leave some of the folds so it creates a little bit more character and a little bit more dynamism to the pose as well. But you don't have to be specifically perfect or anything with this. This is again something that comes with the more you paint, sort of you just become a little bit more naturally instinctive as to where to leave those folds so that it looks a little bit more natural and adds a little bit more character. You kind of don't want to go too overboard and things like that. It's just something to practice. There we go. And again, you can see that the paint is nice and thin as well. This is great because, as I say, you get more for your more out of your paint, so you can your paint lasts longer on your brush when it's a little bit more wet. It also allows you to sort of build those layers up and build the vibrancy up, but without losing the detail on your miniature. If you go too extreme and you put a big splodge on your miniature, sometimes you can lose a bit of detail. So thinning your paints is always a good idea. So I'm going to do a leather combination that I've done quite a lot before, and we're just going with the AK Interactive Leather Brown. And I'm just going to paint this all up and around the leather straps, as you can see here. So I'm just starting with the back and then just moving up and across the leather straps, going over his shoulders, and of course on the front side as well. And I'm going to add the same colour just slightly down on his boots, but I'm just going to try and leave little gaps so that it looks like the shoes aren't just one splodge of colour, that it leaves those little details and textures just around, like sort of the toe caps and then up the side of the boots and up the back. So it kind of separates that colour as well. Again, kind of creating and giving you that element of more detail and more depth to the model in a nice, simple, easy sort of way. So there we go. Once that one is dry, we're going to do the same thing as what we did with the skin. We're going to use 50% of each. We're using leather brown and deep brown. Deep brown is a great colour because this is an intense colour. So being part of the intense colour range, this has a really nice vibrancy to it. So by using a nice thin paint, when you apply this onto the miniature, and I'm using a very, very fine sort of stippling effect just to kind of create a little bit of a scratched out and worn out kind of look and effect to it. And this will dry down, as I say, with the AK paints, they tend to dry down to a really nice matte effect. So you don't have to be too precise, just being a little bit sort of scratchy and scrapey on leathers tends to go a long, long, long way. It makes things look so much cooler, and add so much more character to the model as well. So I'm adding a little bit more just onto the boots, this time a little bit of stippling and just choosing a little bit more where to put this, so just on the sides as I showed you earlier, and just across sort of the toe caps on the front as well. Now for the jeans, we're going back to the dark Prussian blue, but what I'm doing this time, instead of being really, really fancy and picking out every single fold and crease and things like that, because I want these jeans to look really, really, really worn out, we're just going to add a dry brush. And pretty much that's all that is we're getting one of our older brushes that has had a little bit of a beat in. We're going to add a little bit of paint and we're going to rub this into a bit of kitchen towel until there's hardly any paint left on the brush. And then we're just going to slowly, gently apply and build that colour up. Now this is a very, very, very rough way of painting, and what that means is it's great for things like jeans because it's going to make them look really worn out and really battered. So I'm going to add medium blue into the dark Prussian blue as well. And again, the beauty of this is making sure that there's hardly any paint on your brush. So as you can see, the highlight is now very, very gently starting to grow through those folds on the miniature. So I'm not overly painting, I'm not going too extreme, just gently dry brushing just around the trouser, just so that I'm careful not to get any of this paint on the colours I've already painted. But also just trying to control where the areas that I want that highlight to be, mostly, as you can see, around the knees, because that's the areas of the trousers that are going to get worn out the most. And then we're just going to use medium blue on its own and doing the exact same thing. We're going to make sure that there's practically no paint left on this brush. There's very, very, very little paint on this brush. And then we're just going to build that tone, mostly now focusing just around the knees, maybe a little bit on the pockets, just up the back as well, just so that it shows a little bit of worn colour and worn texture. Now the cool thing with dry brushing, as I said, it's very, very gritty and rough, so that allows the jeans to look really worn and really sort of beaten up. And and that's perfect for this kind of miniature and this kind of look. And we're just moving on with a Vallejo gunmetal colour, and this is a true metallic metal, and what we're going to do with this is we're going to use this to pick out some of the very small button details just off the jeans here. So there's a few buttons just across the front, there's a couple just at the bottom of the braces, and one or two at the back here as well. We're just going to use the very tip of the brush just to pick out these little buttons and these little details, and then we're going to use a very fine amount of dry brushing as well. So what I'm going to do is, using hardly any paint on the brush again, we're just going to use a very fine dry brush just down the shotgun like so, and as you can see, that's going to start to pick out the details of the shotgun and make it look like the paint is chipped and worn off the gun. And that's perfect, because again, that's kind of what we're looking for: worn out jeans, worn out shotgun, you know, someone that's really been through the wars. So we're moving on to that flat earth color, and we're going to pick out those details once again just across the shotgun. So we've got a little bit across the handle and the wooden bits just on the pump as well. And as you can see, the shade has done a great job of darkening those recessed points, so by the time that you pick out the highlighted points, it's going to look absolutely perfect. So we're also going to move on and use a beige brown color as well, and with the beige brown, I'm just going to use a very faint amount of dry brushing just across Kendo's hair here, and this should just give us a little bit more depth to that hair. I mean, you can spend a little bit more time painting the hair, but because this guy's hair is so short, there's not a great deal of character or texture or detail to it, so I'm just going to do a little bit of dry brushing. Now for the final stage, we're going to use a Citadel technical colour, and we're going to use Blood for the Blood God. Now, the best thing with Blood for the Blood God, or the best advice I can give you, is less is more. So what we're going to do is we're just going to use the very tip of the brush, and we're going to add a little bit of the Blood for the Blood God on the bandage that he's got just around his wrist here. And then we're also just going to put a small spattering just on the front of his shirt here as well. And when I say less is more, the gentle sort of spattering, you see how much of an effect that has created. Instead of leaving big splodges and big amounts of blood leaving sort of dotted around the shirt, just by creating that little sort of very fine misty effect, it's so much more effective on the miniature than it being covered in blood. So there you go. All in all, that is Robert Kendo. He is part 4 of my Resident Evil painting series. There will be a lot more because I've got the Birkin family to do and Tyrant and all sorts. But there's the 4 that I've done so far. And if you're interested in the Resident Evil series, check out some of the other videos that I've got on here. As I said, I've done Claire, Ada and Leon already. So yeah, they're really cool. So all in all, I'm happy with how he's turned out. So yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for watching. Thank you for the comments. Thank you for the support. I can't thank you guys enough. You guys have been awesome, and I can't wait to see you guys on the next one. Also, don't forget to check me out on Instagram. I'll see you guys later.